Hello, people. Um, Today I will discuss my idea that I hope will change our views on religion and its dogmatic framework. I'm actually wrote this first as an essay, and I'm just going to read it out because I think it's easier to do it that way rather than having to improvise all of it all together. So here we go. Just because you've seen the prettiest girl you have ever seen does not necessarily mean you have seen the prettiest girl you will ever see. Centuries of academic, political, and military conflicts have been raised for a heated debate between religions, killing in the name of. Yet it has been established on such faulty foundations that I will dismantle it in this work. Let's begin. Therefore, this and therefore that are one of two most arrogant terms to have ever been used in theology. It tries desperately to smuggle assumptions in spite of nuances and numinal permutations. Just because you have seen the prettiest girl you have ever seen does not necessarily mean you have seen the prettiest girl you will ever see. Humans have the tendency to sway things to oblivion and to raise things to hyperbole and to its extremities. They say, "Oh, he has risen from the dead. He must be God. Oh, he parted the seas into two. God must be with him. Oh, he has split the moon in half. God must be with him." These assumptions are nothing but primitive and shall always remain primitive. How could we be certain that that is actually God Himself? Well, who else could have done it? Only God has the power to do such a thing. He told us Himself that He was God. Let us all take a deep momentary rest and let us hop back to prehistoric times as an example, scenario. Let's say you're a shepherd boy herding your sheep along the grasslands of China. Then all of a sudden, a higher being approaches you and shows you a revelation. He tells you that he is God Himself and that He wants you as His prophet, but He requires you to kill all of your sheep. Without knowledge of any theology, without knowledge of the Bible or any holy scripture, how do you determine whether you are actually speaking with a God or a higher being that presents himself as the highest? You can't. A good higher being will appear good, but so would an evil being. The most cunning form of evil is the one that pretends to be God. How are we supposed to determine which is which and what is what? Under the classical theistic definition of God, God is omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omniscient. Omnipotent is also known as all powerful. Therefore, God, if such being exists, has to be the most powerful, or in our framework, the highest being. The main struggle is our inability to decipher whether a higher being is indeed the highest being, but we cannot rule out the possibility that these higher beings may actually be deceptive in nature, so deceptive that they will allow an amount of goodness, all for the sake of the action being done in His name and not of that of the highest. Why should we trust them immediately? It's all because they have epistemic monopoly over themselves. Epistemic monopoly means that there's only one way of information, or a downward movement of information, and the higher beings have complete control over that. They control how much we know of them, how we can know them, and more importantly, they give statements that we could never verify through other sources, for again, they have complete monopoly on how we know them. Why is this important to consider when debating about theology? Why must this epistemic monopoly trouble everyone? It allows nuances, very important nuances nonetheless. It gives way to dozens of what ifs that are extremely as likely as these classical explanations. It makes Gnosticism as likely as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It shows just how unjustified our certainty on specific explanations that are innately dogmatic no matter what. What if Greek mythology was actually what truly happened and the world may actually be polytheistic? But Zeus wanted it all for himself, and so he created Christianity and then labeled the other Greek gods as pagan gods and demonic. It may sound strange, but there is uh, nothing to be presented that could completely negate that possibility. Many might argue that although it is a possibility, it isn't probable. But who are we to dare talk about probability? We are simply mere mortals, humans. How dare we talk probability to a god who could create a world out of nothing? The very nature of God that allows him to be infinite, huge, and great in all measures is what makes him even more impossible to understand. The more infinite he becomes, the more infinitesimal we understand, the more infinite the possibilities become. So the higher beings of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam may only be higher beings, but we have no way of knowing whether they are indeed the highest. I call this problem the hierarchy problem, where we are at the lowest in a hierarchy that could well expand close to infinity, but we have no way of knowing whether we have reached the highest or one that simply presents itself to be the highest. And that's where the essay itself ends, but I would like to expand well beyond the paper. So this problem is actually came from a Christian response to a Muslim. So this Christian tells a Muslim that Satan pretended as an angel and it came to Muhammad to give those revelations. Under that scenario, Satan is the god of Islam. But who knows? If such deception could be possible for one religion, why can't that be applied to other religions as well? Could these higher beings truly lie? Well, if we say that God is perfect, then he cannot lie. But God requires the being to be the most powerful being. So as long as there is a being higher than this being, then in a way, this lower high being is imperfect and therefore has the ability to lie or be deceptive. But then this being, we cannot know whether this lower high being is lying or not. If he is lying, he says that I cannot lie. There's no way to answer that, to negate that, or even to verify that. He simply assumes or demands that he cannot lie. But let's remove that out of context for now and say we have. Let's go back to the Muslim example when now Satan comes in. Of course, we know this because we have some background from from Christianity or from the Bible. Now, if Satan comes in, tells Muhammad that he cannot lie, under the same example or the same reasoning we use to justify the honesty of the highest being in Christianity, we should also be inclined to believe that the higher being in Islam is unable to lie, unable to lie. But we know in this case that that being would be Satan. So that's why we can't settle where a being can lie or cannot lie. And the main feature that would allow a being and that would motivate a being, a higher being, to lie would be if that being wasn't the highest. If that being wasn't the highest, he wouldn't be the perfect being. He shouldn't be called the classical theistic god, since he doesn't meet the requirements of being the omnipotent. If he isn't God, and he simply is pretending to be God under those requirements, then that means that this being now, this higher being, is imperfect. It has the ability, it has the possibility to lie, and it has the motivation to lie. If and only if this being is indeed only a higher being. So I guess it's very complicated to understand if you're inclined to believe, or if you associated the word God of Christianity with God itself. So if we cannot prove that the Christian higher being is indeed the highest being, we still cannot call that being capital G-O-D, God. Therefore, if that being cannot be proven to be G-O-D, God, capitalized, that means that being still could technically have the ability to lie against us, to lie against the prophets, to lie against the people, the masses. But one important thing is that this being, although he may be deceptive, he could also still be powerful. He could have facilitated those miracles. But he is powerful, but not the most powerful. He is much more powerful than humans. Yes, let's accept that. And also, in one way, this system allows an infinite regress. If we cannot necessarily prove that this being is indeed the highest, there could also be beings above that highest being, and therefore until we can settle that, we cannot call the being below that one as a god. So as long as we cannot establish the most highest being, or if we cannot prove a being to be God or to be the most powerful, we cannot necessarily call any high being a god, because we may risk believing to something that isn't. We may risk believing to a lesser, higher being that presents itself to be the highest being. Now, you may call it complicated or unuseful, but that's the point. It tries to clarify the terms that are commonly thrown around in religious debates between two religious individuals, or an atheist and religious. So, in a way, I am an agnostic, in a way that I cannot be certain, or which is which. I cannot be certain whether the Christian higher being is indeed the highest being, or whether it is the other one, whoever you may call it, or whether you have your own personal god. That's fine by me. I do not want to say that God exists or God doesn't exist. I'm just trying to clarify the terms um, in order to have a rich discourse when it comes to religion. So uh, I try to negate the dogma in both atheism and theism. So it may be difficult to wrap your head around this concept of the higher and higher beings, but I hope you'll get there. To wrap it up, if we cannot prove a being to be the highest being, then we cannot call that being God. Then God cannot lie. But since that being isn't God, then that being has the ability to lie. So, what decides whether a being is indeed the highest or not? You could say creating a universe. But we do not know the conditions needed to create a universe. We don't know the requirements. We do not know whether only God can create those. We do not know whether a lower being than God could create those. Under that possible scenario, uh, it couldn't have been God that created us, but someone lower than God. Yeah, again, that's quite impossible for us to answer, which is the point of this essay, to dissolve the certainty of religion altogether. So that's all. Thank you.